I am Ray, and what if I told you there was a spiritual lie keeping you miserable? That you should give up all desires. You see, the deeper I went on the spiritual path, the more I saw the truth. Trying to get rid of my desires wasn't spiritual. It was self-denial. I was living a lie. Seppuku. What is seppuku? They say authenticity is the highest vibration. And so to deny your desires would be living a lie, which keeps you in separation from your true and authentic self. For years, I believed that giving up all desires was the path to freedom. But instead, it left me high and dry and frustrated. But here's the truth. You don't have to choose between spirituality and your desires. And today, I will show you why trying to give up your desires may be actually what's keeping you stuck. You see, one day, late at night, I entered into a hellish state called purgatory. My phone is distracting me. Called purgatory. And this is a great turning point on the spiritual path. Because what this means is that you've made the decision to go on the spiritual path, to go within, to go towards God, but you haven't made enough spiritual progress to reap any of the benefits. So you have no spiritual rewards, no inner riches, and because we've turned away from the world, we have no earthly riches either. So it feels like we spent all this time and energy trying to do the right thing, trying to go on the right path, and we have nothing to show for it. And so there is great frustration in not getting what we want from the world. And so I was laying in my bed, feeling great suffering, frustration, annoyed at my life. And I thought to myself, what is the point of all of this spiritual nonsense? If I have to deny my worldly desires and go within, what was the purpose of me giving up my worldly desires if I wasn't getting anything in return? Where are all the promises? Where is the enlightenment? Where's the freedom, the peace, the love, the joy? God is all that I need, then why am I so struggling? And so in that moment, or that night, I made a decision. First of all, I knew that this too shall pass, that these were just fleeting emotions. And I decided to go all in, to have faith and trust that eventually this would bear fruit, that I was on the right path. And here I am, happy. But as Jesus the Christ said, seek first the kingdom of God, and then everything else will be added on to you, which was the advice that I took. There was a part of me that did not want to let go of the worldly desires, and I realized eventually that I did not have to. You see, they say you can't serve two masters because, well, you hate one of them. And it is often the truth that when you are so attached to your worldly desires, you have no interest in God, in spirituality. As it is said, those who look at the world do not see God, and those who look at God do not see the world. You see, the reason that I was frustrated, that I was struggling, the biggest impediment to freedom was ego identity. Why? Because here I was, someone on the spiritual journey. Here I was giving up my desires. Here I was trying to find God. Me, me, me. And because I felt like I had to sacrifice my worldly desires, there was frustration. Because regardless of what I thought, the feeling of strong desires was there regardless. And you see, every one of us, has hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary instinct in your body. And those instincts do not care about your silly little moral belief system. It does not care what you think is right or wrong. The instincts do as they please, and they do not care what you have to say about it. They are fundamental drives. And to think that your conscious mind can simply just ignore these things. Just get rid of them. We don't need these earthly drives. I'm above all that. I'm civilized. I'm spiritual. The instincts are just going to say, oh, is that what you think? Really? Really? That's what you think, huh? Well, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. We'll see about that. And that's why people engage in horrific acts. Because when you suppress your instincts, these drives that evoke these desires, these feelings, that motivate you to act, that is their job. That energy is quite powerful, and it doesn't go away just because you want to pretend that it's not there. There is no avoiding that, no matter what you do. Let's take the sexual instinct, for example. You live in this animal body, so there will always be a sexual instinct. Now, some people's sexual drive is higher than others, but if you try to repress this instinct in the name of being moral and righteous and a good person, you say, I'm going to be spiritual from now on, and we're just going to pretend that that doesn't exist. And so what happens? You get something like the Catholic Church, a lighthouse of morality of the world, a symbol of virtue. And what are they known for? Here's one. Hoarding gold. Diddling. P-diddles. What else? And then God. At number 3. Actually, the Pope comes before God. God at number 4. You see, you can pretend that you're good and righteous all you want. Your instincts will always remind you of what you are, in truth. That your fundamental drives rule your life. Power, control, sexuality, pride. Well, pride isn't really a drive, but you get the idea. You can't just ignore your fundamental drives and try to pretend like you're spiritual. Because think about the electricity flowing through a telephone line. If you touch that electricity, you will die. You will explode. But you don't explode. Why? Because the energy is being channeled properly. The moment you were to take some scissors and cut in between is the moment you get blown up. Because then the electricity goes all over the place and it's very damaging. It's very destructive. So too, if you cannot direct the instincts in a proper way, they will either destroy you from within or create destruction in the outer environment. And you see this, the perfect example is with people who try to go celibate, like priests and people like that. And I think Ram Dass had it perfect. Is that when you try to give up these things too quickly, you try to give them up before it's your time, all you become is a horny celibate. Or like you try to give up smoking before you're really done with it. And every day, yes, physically you're not smoking, but in your mind, that's what you're thinking about. Like, I haven't smoked a cigarette in 162 days, 3 hours, and 21 minutes. The person's going to die from not smoking. People think celibacy is about abstaining from the physical world, but it's not. Celibacy in truth is about abstaining from even a single thought about that desire. So it doesn't matter if on the outside you think you're doing the right things. If you're still thinking about it, you're still addicted. You're still entertaining that desire. And eventually, you will act on that desire because that is the way reality works. Because thoughts create feelings, and feelings motivate us to act. Now you see, we have a little something called karma. And karma is simply memory. Memory stored in the body. And that memory, that conditioning, is the building blocks for our ego identity. Now that memory, that information, it has a charge, an energetic charge. So you can't just get rid of it. You can try to force yourself. So for example, let's just take whatever strong desire you have. It'll be different for everyone. A strong desire. Do you think just magically, overnight, that desire is going to go away? No. It has an energetic charge. And depending on how strong that charge is, depends on how much we fed that desire. We feed the desire our energy. Energy is life. Energy is power. So we give life to that desire. And the more energy we feed it, the longer it takes for that energetic charge to dissipate. So you don't need to force yourself to get rid of the desires. The desire will fall away naturally if you stop feeding it. Because nothing can survive without the energy that you give it. You see, where I went wrong, and where probably many spiritual people go wrong too, is that you don't need to give up your desires to become enlightened, to become free. You must become free, and then your desires will fall away naturally. That is at least what I have experienced. Because, you see, this ego, or identity, it is like the underlying generator that continues to fuel these desires. Ego is like a little sun that continues to feed all of these different things, like desires, like aversions. I mean, practically speaking, our identity is what causes us to act in certain ways, to think certain thoughts, to like the presence of certain people, or to not like certain people, or to not like certain things. And so what enlightenment is, it's the realization that you are not your ego. And so what happens is that the moment you realize you're not the ego, the desires have nothing to feed off of, because they were feeding off your identity. So we never actually have to get rid of our desires. They fall away naturally. I remember an example, I made a video about it, about how I gave up coffee. I drink coffee now. Speak of the devil. Oh, here I am. It's okay, guys, I got the coffee. But a while back, I experienced something interesting. That was, I was drinking like 3 of these things every day, every morning, for weeks. I was a slave. But one day, I ran out of heavy whipping cream, or half and half, whatever I was using. And I had to drink the coffee black. It was so demeaning, so humiliating. I was brought to such poverty. No, the point is, the day when I ran out of half and half, I went to drink 1 of these, and that is about how much I could finish. I couldn't even finish the whole thing. So I went from drinking 3 of these today. So I went from drinking 3 of these a day to barely even being able to finish 1. And then a few days later, I wasn't even interested in drinking it at all. So I tried to drink a cup of green tea. I thought, this is a great alternative, more healthy. And I couldn't, and I had a little cup like this. And I couldn't even finish that. And then before I knew it, I stopped drinking caffeine altogether. So within like a week, I was drinking 3 of these a day to not drinking caffeine at all. And it took me no effort. I didn't have to try to get rid of that desire. I got rid of it naturally. Because what happened was, and which you will experience as well, as you go deeper on the spiritual path, you will become more aware. The people who are the least spiritual are people who are the most unconscious. What is unconscious? Unconscious is the body. So it's people who act more like animals than human beings. And then awareness is consciousness. And so those who have more awareness are higher consciousness. Simple enough. And we associate that with spirituality. So what happens is that when you are unconscious, you don't realize all the stupid things you're doing all the time. I was unconsciously drinking all kinds of coffee without really thinking about it. But the moment that cream could no longer hide the taste of the bitter coffee, I became aware of just how not pleasurable it was at all. Now, here I am, but I'm a functioning addict. Don't judge me. The point was, I remember the moment. Shortly after I awoken in the morning and I took that first sip of coffee, I could immediately feel my vibration lower. I felt worse after drinking it. And then I began to feel more tight, more anxious, and just like, not good. And in that moment where I really felt, where I was really aware of how I felt, I thought, why am I doing this? This is stupid. And that is why I took no effort to drop it. But when you are in your mind about it, when you think there is something to be gained from a desire, it is not very likely that you will let it go, because you think that there is some reward. There is something you gain out of it, and that is why people have trouble letting go of addictions. Because an addiction, for instance, is like putting your hand on a hot stove. It's self-destructive behavior. But the only reason that you would keep your hand on a hot stove is two reasons. You're either not paying attention, you're unconscious, or you just don't like yourself very much. And so what happens as you go on the spiritual path, as you become more aware, all of the stupid things that are keeping you unconscious, that are keeping you in low states of vibration, those things fall away naturally, without any effort on your part. The addictions, the desires, the attachments, you don't have to do anything. But what happens is that we get in the way. For instance, if I have a strong desire, or let's say I have an addiction, and I am living from ego, man, I'm not a happy person. That is I. It's unconscious. The mentality that this person approaches this addiction with is, okay, I'm struggling with an addiction. I have to do something about this. This is terrible. My life is being ruined. And so they struggle, they resist, they fight, because this is the nature of the ego. Struggling, resist. And so it's easy to fall into this psychological drama where you're fighting reality, you're fighting life. You're saying, I should not be this way, and life is unacceptable, and so you suffer. It's miserable. You hate it. But you can avoid all this by going all in on the spiritual path. And you will let go of your addiction naturally when the time is right, in which you will experience far less suffering. So it doesn't make any sense to struggle with your desires, to resist them, to fight them, to want to get rid of them. All that does is place unnecessary burden upon yourself, which creates suffering, which is the one thing that we're all trying to avoid. So, stop it. You're a human being. It's normal to have desires. It's normal to want things. Even if you know they're not good. Does it matter? But what happens is that we get attached to this spiritual identity. Same thing as religious people. Religion. This is my biggest criticism of Christianity. Now, I was essentially born in the church. I lived my whole life growing up going to church, and I was raised Christian. But the main flaw that I see, and it's not really a flaw, it's just an unintended consequence, because the Bible was written for egos, to help the ego in its world of suffering, to help the ego live a better life, which is what most religions teach. But Eastern philosophy, for instance, I'm getting too deep. We're not going to go down this yet. But I will go through a common pitfall, for instance, with Christianity. And that is, it creates a psychological split in the human mind. Because Christ is the good guy and Satan is the bad guy. And Christianity is be like Christ. And Satan is the enemy. So the point is, it's a dualistic religion in that there is a clear distinction between good and evil. Whereas, I'll mention briefly, in Hinduism, for instance, you have the Hindu god Shiva, or Kali, And it is not so clear whether or not they're good or evil. Because Hinduism and Eastern philosophy is less about duality and is more about non-duality. So Shiva has light and darkness within him. Kali has light and darkness within her. Both those polar opposite energies are combined in the same one being. Whereas in Christianity, in the Bible, those two opposite forces are separated. Even though, in truth, Christ and Satan are just two opposites of the same one thing. Because what do they call it? They call it the Antichrist. And think about it, you can't separate negativity from positivity. You can't separate darkness from light. You can't separate cold from hot. They're two parts of the same one thing. But, for whatever reason, one of the unintended consequences of Christianity is that it makes us believe that these are two separate forces. And they're not. They're two opposites of the same one thing. And so what happens? We create an ego identity around being the good guy, about being the hero. And what that causes us to do is that we repress the darkness within us. We repress the evil. And when we repress that darkness, that energy, that powerful destructive energy does not go away. It turns into like an evil monster in our unconscious that every day is brewing and getting stronger, and one day it's going to come back to get us. Why? Because imagine how you would feel if you were cast into eternal darkness because you were ugly and unlovable. And so you better believe that that beast is coming to get you if you fall into this trap. That is, being too attached to the light. And again, that's why you see things like the Catholic Church or like priests. They do bad things, especially when it comes to sexuality. Because you cannot repress your darkness. You cannot repress your instincts. It will just come back from the darkness, grip hold of you, and cause you to do bad things. It is better to have the devil right in front of you than behind you, pulling your strings without your awareness. You see, we suffer so much because we label our desires as bad or as wrong. We judge ourselves for having these desires. Think about how much suffering religion has caused by making you feel guilty for having certain thoughts, for having certain desires, for having certain feelings. Why? Because you are a sinner. You are wicked at heart. Your fundamental nature is wicked. And so you want wicked things. Your desires are wicked. And you have to punish yourself. Get the whip out. Beat yourself into submission. Starve yourself and fast. Now, you should repent when you feel like you have done something wrong. But we have to understand something very important that's going to blow your mind. It blew my mind. The only reason you feel guilty, that you feel shame, is because of your identity. You see, we might assume that if guilt arises, that it means we must have done something wrong. But it doesn't. If you have feelings of shame, it must mean that you went against God, you did the wrong thing, and now you fear you will be punished. You fear some consequence. And that is all psychological drama. Because what happens if you have an identity of poverty? For instance, you believe money is the root of all evil or something stupid like that. Anytime you come into money, you will feel guilty, shameful, and you will get rid of that money. So you will always remain in poverty because the identity is more important. If you have an identity around hard work, not a bad thing. None of these are bad things. It's just be wary of the consequences. If you have an identity around hard work, then you will always struggle. For instance, to make money. Because anytime something is easy, you will say, oh, it's not valuable. It can't be valuable if it's easy. It can't be valuable if it's effortless. So you'll feel guilty about it. Oh, I did this, it was easy. So it's not worth anything. It's not that the guilt is valid. It's that your identity is what caused the guilt. If you identify as a traditional religious person, guess what? Anytime you have sexual desire, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel shameful. And you're going to repress it. Because it goes against your identity. If you strongly identify with being a masculine man, you are going to naturally repress feminine feelings, feminine traits, like compassion, empathy, nurture, because to feel these things would be weird. It would feel weird because it goes against your identity. And it is easier to repress them than it is to integrate them into your identity. But again, the monster will return for you one day, my friend. Because, for instance, when you are imbalanced because of an attachment to an identity, it causes you to act in ways that are imbalanced, that are unhealthy. So however good you think your identity is, you will always have to integrate the opposite energy. And so, for instance, if you're a hypermasculine man, you have no choice but to integrate the feminine qualities of compassion, empathy, nurturing, love. And that is why people in prison are predominantly men. Because you can't be imbalanced for so long before you experience trouble. The point I'm trying to make is that any desire that comes into conflict with your chosen identity will cause guilt, will cause shame. It's not that the desire is wrong, because the guilt and the shame and the fear will make you believe that it's wrong. Because, well, these feelings don't feel nice, so it must be wrong. I must have done the wrong thing. But it's not true. The only reason that those emotions were there is because your desire came into conflict with whatever chosen identity you have. And the moment you get rid of that identity, the guilt, the shame, the fear, it goes away. How do you get rid of the identity? Enlightenment, which is merely the awareness that you were never your ego identity in the first place. That you don't have to identify with your thoughts. That you don't have to identify with your feelings. And that you don't have to identify with your desires. But if we get caught in the psychological drama of thinking that our desires are wrong, which creates guilt and shame and fear for having them, then we will stay in unconsciousness. Because when you are entangled with strong emotions, you lack clarity. And when you lack clarity, you are separated from the truth, which is living unconsciously. You see, Eckhart Tolle once said, the primary cause of our unhappiness is not what happens to us, it's our thoughts about it. When you are trapped in an addiction, something that you know is wrong, but you just can't stop doing it, it possesses you, takes control, and it creates a whole lot of problems in your life, a whole lot of shame and guilt and fear. It is very easy, natural, to assume that this thing should not be and that I must get rid of it. That this desire is wrong and I have to strive and try really hard to kill it. But that is a trap. You can go that route and have many years of suffering and struggle trying to deal with all of this. But the fact is that the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So everything you focus on comes at a price. You either focus on what is wrong or you focus on what is right. You either focus on negativity or positivity, darkness or light. And if you focus on what is wrong, you simultaneously take your attention away from all that is good. So for instance, when you are caught in the psychological drama of judging yourself, you are feeding negativity and ruining your life. You cannot add gasoline onto a fire and expect it to go out. If your current situation is negative, you cannot feed more negativity and expect a positive outcome. So judging yourself, judging your desires, judging your experiences as wrong, as bad, as negative, serves no purpose but to destroy you. It's irrelevant. Forget about it. Guilt, shame, fear, useless emotions. Yes, it's good for the animal. For those who are stuck in lower consciousness, as we all are at different times during our life, these things can be highly motivating and they can drive us to do better. But on the spiritual path, you will let go of these things because you realize they do nothing but hurt you. Because with higher awareness, you come to see the truth. And you see that the truth is not that the desires are bad, not that the guilt, shame, and fear is bad, or that the addictions are bad. What you find is that the attachment to the identity was the problem all along. The attachment to the identity was causing the negative emotions, was causing the desires, was causing the addictions. And when you see through the illusion of the ego identity, all of everything else fixes itself. So don't waste your time dealing with all of these things. Don't waste your time trying to get rid of your desires. Because what that does is that you're constantly judging yourself as being wrong. And from God's perspective, everything is perfect. There is nothing wrong with you. We are all on our own unique journey. And we are all perfect exactly where we are. Let's say there is a river that leads to the ocean. You wouldn't say that somebody who's almost at the end toward the ocean is better than someone who just started, who just began down the river. We're all at different points on our journey, but we're all headed toward the same destination. It's just our judgments about reality that keep us stuck, assuming that our desires are wrong. But it doesn't matter, because even if your desires are wrong or evil, if you are wrestling with them, if you are resisting them, then you are sure to get possessed by them. And if you are struggling with evil, the best solution is to be non-attached. Let me see, I think there was a quote by Jesus. I think he said, yes, Jesus said, resist not evil. So even if you have evil and wicked desire in your heart, if you don't identify with it, it has no power over you. But when you wrestle with it and you struggle with it and you fight it, now it does have power over you. Or if you repress it, pretending that everything is okay, again, it comes back to possess you and ruin your life. You see, I like to think that enlightenment is kind of like chopping off the head to a chicken. Man, creating a new language here. When you chop off the head to a chicken, it continues to wiggle around for a long time. What that means is that the ego, the identity, the desires, the attachments, all will continue for a time, depending on their energetic momentum. But once you see through the illusion and you don't identify with your ego anymore, you don't identify with your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, they begin to lose juice. And that juice dissipates over time. And the more juice they lose, the less power they have over you. Because the whole time they were feeding on your energy. And energy is power. So enlightenment, awakening, is taking your power back. All that which keeps us a slave. The ego holds us prisoner. And that is why enlightenment is freedom. Because all these things, even addictions, they lose power over you. And eventually they fall away naturally. Because nothing can survive without the energy you give them. And we give our energy to things by wrestling with them, by struggling with them. What we resist persists. And why do we resist, do we struggle with our desires, with our attachments? It is because we have identified with them. And so all of these things have a permanent fuel source that continues to feed them every single day. And until that fuel source is out of the way, none of these things will be able to fall away naturally. But instead, you will have to struggle and fight. And sure, if you struggle and fight with your addiction long enough, you can force yourself to be free from it. But then you live the rest of your life as an addict. Because you identify as an addict, and so you have to spend your whole life avoiding the addiction or the trigger. To me, it doesn't make sense. If I was addicted to alcohol for many years, and I struggled and I fought really hard to get out of that, but now 10 years later, 20 years later, I still have to avoid drinking a single sip of alcohol. Because the moment that alcohol touches my lips, back down the downward spiral we go. So my life can be ruined like that, again. Whereas when you find true freedom, the addiction loses power over you. And even if you engage in it again, it doesn't matter. Because all of that energetic charge goes away. And you see, unconsciousness is the source of all suffering. But suffering is the root of all enlightenment. So instead of trying to get rid of your desires, to get rid of your attachments, to get rid of your addictions, that is an ego thing. The ego is trying to get rid of the ego. Doesn't make any sense. Instead, you use your addictions as the path to enlightenment. That is what I did. And that is what works. Because the suffering your attachments cause, your desires, your addictions, they will lead you to awakening. They will heighten your awareness. See if you can tell the difference here of these different methods of living. For instance, the negative way, when you struggle with your addictions, you fight them, you judge yourself, you fight yourself, your desires, your attachments, you label yourself and say, this should not be. I'm being bad, I'm being wrong, this is not good, I don't like this. You're focusing on negativity. And so it keeps you stuck in those lower states of being. But when you realize, when you come to higher clarity, higher awareness, when you dedicate yourself to the spiritual path, you realize that, oh, wait a minute, God was always in control. That from God's perspective, everything is perfect. It's only me from my little ego that's judging everything. The more you turn your attention toward God, the less the ego has any power over you. And so when you struggle with your addictions or your desires, instead of judging yourself as wrong, you use them for your highest spiritual growth, because God put them in your life specifically for that. Every problem, everything you struggle with in this life was placed specifically for you. Exactly what you needed to lead you back to God, to lead you from unconsciousness to awareness, from darkness to light. But what happens is that when we get caught in the psychological drama of it all, we stay stuck and we never quite make it to a better life. And so many people die from their addictions. Many people act on their wicked desires, and it ruins their life because they just quite couldn't figure it out. But here's how you figure it out. You turn your attention toward God. You say, okay, well, God, you could take my addiction away in a moment. And so if it's still here, well, then there must still be something for me to learn. I don't need to get caught in the guilt and the shame and the fear of it all. God clearly wants this addiction to be present in my life. And the moment I learn the lesson, the addiction falls away. The addiction is your teacher. The attachments are your teacher. The desires are your teacher. They are good things if you choose to see it that way. It all comes down to your attitude. Whether you choose to see what is wrong or you choose to see what is right. Because both the darkness and the light are equally important to the wholeness of all things. You cannot have what is good without having what is wrong, what is bad, what is negative, what is dark. The suffering that these things cause are what drive you to freedom. I realized this the other day, where God allows suffering in our life because without it we wouldn't be motivated to do anything. Even if you're the most enlightened person on the planet, you're an advanced spiritual seeker, you would not want to get rid of the negativity, because it is in contrast that gives life meaning. As I heard Ram Dass say, after a while, the lows become more interesting than the highs. When you think of yourself as this high spiritual being, and then you fall to an addiction, and remember, oh, wait a minute, I forgot, I'm still a monkey. When you find yourself having these earthly desires, oh, wait a minute, I'm not as spiritual as I thought I was. And in the beginning, that causes a bit of stress, because your identity as a spiritual being has been threatened. And then the next lesson to learn after that is, oh, wait a minute. One of the most spiritual things I can do is be human. Is to not fight your desires. Is to realize that it's all part of the game. This is all part of it. All the problems, all the addictions, all the desires that you go through, they are leading you to your highest potential, no matter how bad they seem. The question is, well, how long will you stay stuck in unconsciousness? Because if you focus on how your addictions, your desires, your attachments, if you focus on how these things are serving you, you will rise up much quicker and be free from them much quicker, with much less suffering, with much less struggle. But if your attitude is negative and you're always judging yourself, you're always fighting with yourself, judging your experiences, then life will drag you along kicking and screaming. So the question is, how much do you want to suffer? Forget right and wrong. Do you want to live a good life or not? And if you want to live a good life, well, then you can't continue to judge yourself. And that is the problem that a lot of good-hearted people face. That is why they say the good die young. Because good-hearted people naturally feel shame and guilt much easier than a psychopath. A psychopath doesn't care about its wicked desires. But the problem is that once you allow the fear in, once you allow the shame, the guilt, these negative emotions can be toxic if you do not deal with them properly. The emotions by themselves are not bad, they're not wrong. The question is, how much do you ruminate upon them? How much in the storm do you get caught? Or can you learn to transmute the negativity into positivity? Can you learn to use the negative situations that you experience for your highest spiritual growth? Because God is just standing there from the sidelines, seeing what you're going to do. And if you turn toward God, God can guide you toward the light. But if you are too caught up in the world, then it's easy to get stuck forever and maybe not make it out alive. And that happens to a lot of people, good and bad. And so whenever you struggle with strong desires, instead of trying to get rid of them, instead of trying to give them up, just sit with them. Practice non-judgment. Accept the ugliest parts of yourself, because so long as you reject them, so long as you consider yourself not worthy, you will repress those parts of yourself into your unconscious, and they will come back to haunt you. You get a false sense of security by not looking at them. It's like you're in a drowning ship, and instead of paying attention to the fact that it's drowning, you're looking at the birds in the sky. Oh, very nice. And for a moment, you don't have to face the reality that you're in. And you see, we're all going to make mistakes. And those mistakes are often because, well, we have a desire to do something that we know is wrong, but can't stop doing. And instead of labeling it as a mistake, just sit with yourself. Observe the feelings that arise. Observe the fear. Observe the shame. Sit with the guilt. All the negative emotions, just sit with it. Practice the art of observation. Because the more you get used to observing, the easier it becomes. And what happens is that when you observe the shame or the guilt, the feeling in your body, when you really pay attention to what is the characteristics of this feeling, what happens is that you stop fighting it, you stop resisting it, and your attention, your awareness dissipates the negative charge, the negative emotion, and you become free from it. But what is unconsciousness? Unconsciousness is the inability to be present with yourself. You're just on autopilot. You're not paying attention. And so when you slow down and you observe yourself, you observe your feelings, you stop living unconsciously. And because you're in non-resistance, you're in acceptance. And so instead of getting dragged along for days and days by your mistakes, you recover like that. Why? Because you're no longer ruminating on all kinds of negativity. You're no longer resisting these negative feelings and feeding them. It is our thoughts and our feelings that continue to keep us down after we've made a mistake. For instance, if you fall off a horse, you can sit there in pain, agonizing. Oh, I hate this. I hate my life. Oh, this sucks so bad. Ah, my foot. Or you can just get back on the horse and keep going. Which person experiences less suffering? Buddha once told the parable of the two arrows. The first arrow we get hit with is the arrow from life. The pain that we experience. The things we find unfavorable. But the second arrow we inflict upon ourselves through our reaction to the first. The first arrow is pain, that is inevitable. The second arrow is suffering, that is optional. So the question is, how much suffering will you continue to inflict upon yourself? And the way to be free from that suffering is acceptance and non-judgment. Because that is the nature of awareness, of consciousness, of God. Because God does not judge you. God accepts you. God loves you with all of your imperfections. No matter how evil you think you are. Even the demons God loves. It is only our judgments upon ourselves that keep us stuck in negativity, that separate us from God. So see if you can sit with yourself whenever you have strong emotions, strong thoughts, even feel what it's like to have desire. And what happens is, well, you can learn to enjoy the desire itself. You don't necessarily have to act on it, because to act on it really quickly is a reaction that is unconscious. But the more you become aware, the more you slow down, the less reactive you get, and you stop acting on your desires. But what you can do is take a more tantric perspective on spirituality, which is the opposite of the renunciate, meaning you use your desires as a pathway to enlightenment. Instead of trying to get rid of them, you, in a way, indulge them. Because what will happen? Think about it this way. If you have a strong desire, and you say, okay, well, this desire is wrong, I can't do this. This is bad. Now, I'm not telling you to do anything illegal, but what will happen is that if you don't experience this, there may always be a thought lingering in the background of your mind, like, what could have been? I could have done this. So the desire stays with you for many, many years as a thought. But what happens? If you engage in the desire, you have the experience. Whether it's wrong, whether it's right, it doesn't matter. Through the experience, you can discover the illusion of it. What this means is that you have a strong desire, for whatever reason, but once you indulge in it, you will realize that it wasn't really what you wanted. That you thought a desire would lead you to a certain feeling, but when you indulged in the experience, it wasn't as satisfactory as you wanted it to be. And once the illusion is destroyed, so too is the desire. Because you're no longer thinking, oh, I wonder what that would be like. That would be amazing for me to experience that. And so you destroy the charge. There's no meaning left in it, because you've experienced it. There once was a story of two men, two buddies, who lived very different lives. One man was a church-going man. Went to church every Sunday, tried to live a religious life, read the Bible. And the other man, his friend, was a bit of a degenerate. Always drinking, always doing drugs, always sleeping with prostitutes. Opposite lives. And one day, on a Sunday, these buddies were having a conversation. And the one friend said, well, I better get ready for church. And the other friend said, yeah, I better get going too. I'm going to go to the brothel and have a good time. And so they went their separate ways. And what happened next, you would not believe. While the man was in church, he was thinking about what it would be like to be with a prostitute. And when the man was with the prostitute, he was thinking about what it would be like to be in church. So tell me, who was the one who was with God? Who was the one who was really at church? Was it the man who was physically present, but his mind was elsewhere? Or was it the man who was physically distant, but his mind was present? You see, when we're so attached to being virtuous, or too attached to the light, the darkness fascinates us because it's so different from the norm. That's why you see a lot of religious people, they have a fascination with the demonic. It captures their attention, it grips them, because opposites attract. The contrast makes things meaningful. So what can happen is that, well, you try to live a good and virtuous life, but guess what? You're human. You're going to have desires that aren't aligned with your virtuous and moral life. You're going to have desires that aren't aligned with your chosen, made-up identity. And those desires will grip you, and they won't let you go. So often it is better to experience those desires, to be free from it, rather than holding on to the thought for your whole life, because those thoughts of your so-called wicked desires, they will prevent you from being present. Your body may be present, but your mind will be elsewhere. But when you indulge in that desire, it becomes easy to let it go, because you see through its illusion. And sometimes, guess what? You may have to go through it many, many times to wake up to the fact that, oh, wait a minute, I did this, the result was not good. It's not actually what I want. I just thought I wanted it. But then we forget, and so we indulge in it again. And then we remember, oh yes, I forgot. This isn't actually what I want. And then we indulge in it again, because we forgot again. Hundreds and hundreds of times. That's what happens with addictions. Until you experience enough suffering with that addiction, where the awareness that suffering produces finally destroys the illusion of the desire. When you get fed up, when there is only pain and no pleasure left, because at the end of the day, there was only pain, for instance, with an addiction. But we were under the illusion that there was something to be gained for us, which is why we continue to repeat the behavior. But to avoid suffering for years and years and years, like most people do, you spiritualize your life. Meaning no matter what you experience, you use it for your highest spiritual growth. Your main point of attention is toward God. Doesn't matter your addictions, doesn't matter your wicked desires, doesn't matter. As long as you're pointed in the right direction, you will make it to your destination. Now, I'm not an expert in Tantra, but this is what I see it to mean. That you use your desires as the pathway to freedom. Rather than avoiding them, you indulge in them, and that frees you from the illusion of them. And instead of suffering like most people, this is what you would do. When you have a strong desire, and you find yourself at the point of no return, meaning you know you're going to indulge in it, you've accepted it, it's going to happen. As you enter into it, instead of fighting, resisting, struggling, you just take a moment, breathe, and instead of running away, you engage in the desire with a higher sense of awareness. But you can't do that if you're fighting it, if you're resisting it, if you're struggling with it. Because struggling with these thoughts and emotions create a lack of clarity. And so what you want is the most clarity. The more clarity you have, the easier it will become to see through the illusion of the desire. Which is why, for instance, the whole coffee thing. I had the desire to drink coffee. I was drinking it all the time. But without the cream, I had a higher awareness of how nasty the coffee tasted. And how it made me feel bad. And it was through that awareness that allowed for me to drop it without effort. But if I was struggling and fighting it and resisting, oh no, I know I want coffee, but I can't have it. Can't have coffee. I know it's not good for me. I know I shouldn't drink it, but I just have to. I just have to. And then guess what? You indulge in it, and then you feel guilty and shameful. Huh? If you have a push-pull relationship with anything, you are screwed. I mean, you can use it for your benefit too, but that contrast keeps you stuck in it, which is why it's so hard to escape addictions. Why? Because in the beginning, you have the desire, oh no, not this again. Oh, and then you start fighting it, and then you start resisting it, and the thoughts, oh no, I don't want to do this. And then eventually you just give in, you surrender. So the desire is pulling you into it, and you're resisting, you're trying to push it away. But then you surrender. But then afterwards, you feel guilty, you feel shameful. Oh man, I hate myself, I hate my life, I hate all of this. So you get a temporary high, and then you get a strong low. Then you return to baseline, and then the desire comes again. You resist it, but then you surrender. You get pulled back down, higher highs and lower lows. So you get less pleasure and more suffering each and every time you engage in that addiction, in that strong desire. And once you become aware that this is a stupid deal, not intellectually, you have to experience it for yourself, then it becomes natural and effortless, because you say, well, I'm tired of suffering like this. I don't want this. And so it's easy to let it go. But think about it. How hard is it to let go when you want something? It's very hard. In fact, you could say it's impossible. The more you want something, naturally, the less you want to let it go. So avoid getting pushed and pulled around by this addiction, by this desire. And instead, if you can practice remaining neutral, non-attached, through your awareness, through your observation, you neutralize the energy. Because energy is created through tension, which is why, for example, people can stay stuck in abusive relationships. You fight and then you make up. And you fight and then you make up. And then you fight and then you make up. Why is this so attractive? When you know it's wrong, when you know it's destructive? Because there's so much energy in that tension. How good does it feel to make up after a fight? How good does it feel to have relief after a problem or a struggle? And that is what keeps you stuck. But when you remain neutral, when you observe, you neutralize the energy, and you're no longer pulled around by the desire. Non-attachment is freedom. For instance, think about it this way. Here's a desire, here's you. The reason we get screwed over is because you and the desire become one. We are attached to the desire because of our identity. And so we and the desire become one. And so the desire pulls us around all over the place. And that is why we feel a slave. Because we are stuck. We're stuck together with that thing. But what happens when you observe, you naturally create non-attachment. Because to observe something requires two things. It requires an object to observe and a subject to observe that object. You are always the subject, and whatever you observe is always the object. So, you create non-attachment through your observation. You observe your thoughts, and naturally you will come to the realization that you are not your thoughts. You become aware of the feeling of that desire, and you realize that you are not that desire. You see, when we are one with our desire, it is because we have identified with it. If you identify with your thoughts can now pull you all over the place, and they take away your peace. And so when you are a slave to something, to a desire, if you want to become free from it, which is synonymous with non-attachment, you observe, and that is how you create separation. You create space between yourself and whatever it is you observe. And think about it. Now that there is space, this is like your safe space in which, for instance, your desire no longer has any power over you. No thought has any power over you. No feeling has any power over you. And that is how you become free. And in this place of neutrality, in this observing place, absolute clarity is found. Think about it this way. A nice, clear pool of water. pristine. But when there's turbulence, when it's all over the place, when you're getting pulled by your desires, by your thoughts, there's ripples in the water, there lacks clarity. And again, the quicker you find clarity, the quicker you can let go of whatever it is that is ruining your life, or whatever it is you perceive to be ruining your life. Or how about this? The more clarity you have, the more you realize how God is using it for your highest spiritual growth. So, instead of resisting, instead of fighting the desire, you practice observing. And the more you observe, the easier it becomes. You observe the feeling, the trigger. You watch yourself getting triggered, and the desire pulls you into action. And you just watch yourself. You watch yourself step by step as you're getting pulled into this behavior. You see how the thought evoked a feeling, the feeling, which is the desire, motivated you to act. Then you watch yourself as you act. You watch yourself during the process. How do you think during the process? How are you feeling during the process? Just observe. Don't resist it. And hey, if you're going to indulge in a desire, at least enjoy it. If you can be present for your desire, it is far less painful and more enjoyable. And then you observe yourself afterwards. How do you feel afterward? What are you thinking afterwards? And no matter what comes up, doesn't matter your actions, doesn't matter your thoughts, doesn't matter your feelings, it does not matter. You are the observer of all of those things. Your feeling is an object, your thought is an object, your actions are an object, your body is an object. No matter what you experience, you are always the observer. So no matter what, you can always cultivate this safe space by practicing and learning how to observe things with detachment. And what this does, it diffuses the energy of that desire. It diffuses the energy of that addiction, or the thought, or the feeling. So you no longer stay stuck. Oh, did an Elon there. And what I have discovered is that over time, as I've done this process, sure, in the beginning, it's a bit tough. You have to have courage. You have to have faith in God. You have to have trust that God is guiding you, that God is here with you. Because to engage in a desire that you think is bad, you are consciously and intentionally doing something you think is bad. But it's not bad. It's our judgment of it that is bad. As long as you're not hurting somebody else, God can use this process. Whether it's an addiction or a desire, you can use it for your highest spiritual growth. And what I've discovered as I've gone through this process, not fighting the addictions, not fighting the desires, not resisting them, not judging myself, just observing. The more I have observed, the further I've gone on the spiritual process, the more awareness that I've cultivated, the addictions fall away by themselves. Because they no longer can feed on your energy. Because as soon as the desire comes up, you're observing it. And so it has no fuel to feed off of. It cannot sustain itself. As soon as some fear or some shame or some guilt arises, you observe it. It can't feed, it can't perpetuate. So the feeling dissipates. When you observe the negative thought, you don't ruminate on it. And so it can't feed, and so it dissipates. So your feelings are no longer pulling you all over the place. Your thoughts are no longer pulling you all over the place. You become the eye of the storm, in which it doesn't matter what is happening around you, you are always at peace. Because you have tapped into the innermost core of your being that is already free from all of this. That is already peace. That its very nature is joy, love, abundance. That is what it means to be awakened, to return to God. And so I have been able to overcome pretty much all of my addictions, the strong desires, without effort. But here's the key, and here's the amazing thing, is that you never had to give up your desires in the first place. Because at the end of the day, a desire is just a thought, nothing more. The desire is not real. And what I mean by that is that when we're told to give up all desires, it's not that you give up your desires. so that you give up a thought about your desires. Because what is a desire? It's a thought that emerges, that evokes a feeling that causes you to act. You could say a desire is thoughts, feelings, and actions. The whole process. I mean, typically we associate a desire with a feeling, but it's more of a process that is triggered by a thought. Because, well, if there was no thought, then there would really be no desire. But the chain of events is not really linear. So for instance, if you have a feeling in your belly, you label that feeling as, oh, I'm hungry. You don't need to label that feeling as hunger, but you do. And that thought with that feeling motivates you to act. But what happens? If you have the feeling and you don't label it, you just observe it, you don't act on it. And eventually the feeling passes, because this too shall pass, and you stop being hungry. So too with any desire. Now, of course, if it's an instinct, it will come back later. But what you find, for instance, with fasting is that the feeling of hunger is really strong during the second night. But after the third day, the feeling just goes away. You're not hungry anymore. But if we get so caught up in our thoughts, labeling the feelings, then we will act contrary to our desires. In this case, a fast. And so what happens when we're told to give up desires? For instance, if I tell you right now, in order to be enlightened, you have to give up all your desires. What does this mean? Well, where are your desires? Where are they? Where are they right now? Find them. Find them quickly. Please, let's go. Chop chop. Where are your desires? I don't know where they are. Where are they? They don't exist. It's just a thought. In this present moment now, there are no desires, unless maybe you have one. What I mean is that in the present moment, there is no desire. Only when we have a thought, or when we have a feeling, does the desire magically appear. So when I tell you to give up all desires, it doesn't really mean anything. Because, well, right now, you have none. Let's assume. Maybe you're hungry, I don't know. But right now in this present moment, if you have no desires, well then, what does it mean to give them up? You don't have them. But when we get in our minds about it, if you can see, the concept of giving up all our desires is very, very stressful. I have all these things that I want in life, and I can't have them now? What is this? And so we resist that notion, because we want what we want and we don't care. And enlightenment isn't enough of a reward to motivate us to give them up. But if you can pay attention, if you can see clearly, this is all just an intellectual nonsense thing. It's just a thought. We get all caught up in our mind about giving up desires, which creates resistance, which says, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want this. Like in the beginning story I told, where I was sitting in my bed and I was frustrated and I was angry that I was being forced to give up my desires. But I was just caught in my own mind, my own ego identity. And so the truth is, you give up nothing, and you receive everything. This is why, again, Christ said, seek first the kingdom of God, because within you is the eternal, is the infinite, and outside of you is the temporary and the limited. You can have all of the things in the world, and it will not matter. It will not satisfy you, no matter what you do, no matter what you get. But when you tap into the eternal, you also have all of the temporary. When you tap into the infinite, you also have access to all that is limited. So it's not that we should reject our worldly desires for higher spiritual ones. Both the world, let's say earth, and spirit, these are nothing but two opposites of the same one thing. One is not better than other. That is the main flaw with religion. You assume that the worldliness is less, that it's worse, that we should only prioritize what is good and spiritual and all that. But from God's perspective, from truth, from wholeness, the darkness and the light are equally important. which means that all the things that we label as bad, as wrong, as terrible, they are necessary. You can't get rid of them. And what I mean is that, well, the universe is perfectly balanced between negativity and positivity. No matter how much positivity is added, it will always return to equilibrium. No matter how negative things get, it will always return to equilibrium. Everything is perfectly balanced, but we as human beings are imbalanced. And it is our goal, our job in this life, to return to balance, to return to wholeness. That is one of our fundamental drives. And to return to wholeness means to accept all parts of yourself that are earthly, and also the parts of yourself that are spiritual. That you learn to accept life as a messy human being. And sometimes, oftentimes, you'll make mistakes. You'll do the wrong things. You will most certainly be imperfect so long as you are in this body. And that is not wrong. You are already perfect for where you're at on your spiritual journey. Because even if you're a loser, you're perfect at being a loser. The only reason that people judge losers as bad is because we think winning is good. And there is truth to that. But we're not talking about from our limited human perspective. We're talking about from the highest truth of what God sees. Assuming, this is my best guess, because God is wholeness. And so, again, it's not that we reject the earthliness for the spirit. It's that we put things in their proper place. You don't go out into the world and try to satisfy all of your silly desires, because it's not going to do anything for you. But if you're already there, if you're already engaging in that, you use those desires to lead you back toward God, to lead you toward freedom. Because suffering is the #1 catalyst for spiritual growth. And eventually, whether in this lifetime or a million lifetimes, whatever, you will come to the realization that there is nothing in this life that will give you satisfaction for any length of time. You cannot find lasting satisfaction in a temporary world, but you can find lasting satisfaction in the eternal. And what I realized along the way was that it's not that I have to give up my worldly self, that I have to give up my worldly desires. You can have it all. You can have everything you want. But the difference is, I'm under no illusion that it's going to bring me happiness, because I already found happiness. Everything else is the cherry on top. I realized I didn't have to give up my desires, just my thoughts about it, just my attachment. And that in surrendering, when you give up the thoughts, that is when you become open to receive. In other words, I'm sure you've heard of the law of attraction. And what this means, first of all, well, we live in an energy-based universe. So everything is energy. And the energy that you give off will attract certain experiences, certain things. So, when you are attached to strong desire, think about what this implies for a moment. If you have strong desire, it means you are giving off lack and scarcity energy. You are saying to the universe, you are saying to life, you're saying to yourself, I do not have what I want. And so you attract more lack and scarcity, because that is the energy you're giving off. Why? Is because this is a general template of how we create our reality. Who you are influences you to act in certain ways, which create certain consequences in your life. Your desire, which is rooted in ego identity, you're operating from a state of lack. And so you act in ways that give off lack and scarcity energy, which causes you to receive lack and scarcity. So when I was frustrated that I wasn't getting what I want in this life, I was actively pushing everything I wanted away, doing the opposite of what I wanted. But what happens when you surrender? What happens when you give up your thoughts about your desires? When you just remain in the present moment? When you return to the innermost core of your being? When you find God, when you find the eternal within you, what happens? You are satisfied. You see, on the spiritual journey, on the inner journey, I had to give up material success for a while, because you can only really focus on one thing at a time. You got to go all in on something. And so there's a sacrifice to be made. But what happens is that when you find the source of all fulfillment, the source of peace, love, and joy, you become satisfied. During my life, I was forced into the inner journey because I was suffering so much. My life wasn't working out, and so I needed to find freedom. So I went within, and freedom is what I found. And so I learned to be happy and satisfied with nothing. Nothing. Because think about it. If you're not happy now, if you're not satisfied now, when you get a whole bunch of stuff, you're going to have more things to not be satisfied about, to not be happy about. There's always going to be something that bothers you. It's like when you try to escape your life to go on vacation, you might realize that, oh, wait a minute, I'm still stuck with me. I am the problem. But most people don't realize that. So you fix yourself first. You find inner peace. You find inner harmony. And then the outer reality begins reflecting that change. Because the inner reality and the outer reality are reflections of each other. What you have right now in this life is a reflection of who you have been. So if you truly want what you say you desire, you must be the one who naturally gets those things. And when you surrender to the present moment, when you are satisfied, you are no longer living in lack and scarcity, but you are living in abundance, because to live in abundance is to be satisfied. So you are abundance, so you act in a way that promotes abundance, and so you have abundance. And this is counterintuitive, because at least I thought, well, if I give up my desires, then how will I get them? But the way to actually get those desires is to surrender them. But you can't kind of secretly keep a hidden stash of desires and tell yourself, oh, okay, if I just surrender, I'll get my desires. I'll get my desires. It's not about getting your desires. It's about being free from the illusion of them. That you cannot find lasting satisfaction in a temporary world. That your desires are not actually what you want. But sometimes, as Jim Carrey once said, we have to get everything we want in this life. The riches, the fame, the relationships, everything. To realize at the end of the day, it wasn't what we really wanted. Because what we really wanted was this. Whether we know it or not, all desire is secretly motivation to find God. Because we have a black hole within us. And most people, they try to fill that black hole with temporary and limited things. But that black hole is eternal. That is why the more you feed your desires, the more empty you become. Because the bigger that hole gets within us, the more we need to fill it. But God is eternal. So the only thing that can satisfy that black hole is God. And that is why we feel satisfied. And so, yes, it does take some courage to go all in on the spiritual path. Because there is a part of us, the animal body or animal nature, it has fundamental drives that cannot be ignored. And if you ignore those drives, they will become frustrated and they will force themselves upon you. But until we find the innermost core of our being, the aspect of ourselves that is eternal, until we find God, we will always kind of desperately seek to satisfy our desires. That black hole within us will drive us to fill it. And we will be stuck on a perpetual, never-ending cycle of suffering. Because we will never find the satisfaction we are looking for. The question is, how much will we suffer until we wake up to the truth? And so what I realized somewhere along the way is that once I found what I was truly looking for, well, now I can have fun in the world. And I'm not so desperately trying to find happiness in the same place where everybody loses it. But I can actually enjoy my experiences. We can enjoy the temporary pleasures and not be attached to them. Because we can accept that that is the nature of life. It's change. So we're not so desperately trying to hold on, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. When you live from that perspective, even when you get everything you want, you won't be able to enjoy it because you won't be present. Desires keep you in your thoughts. They keep you in the past and future. And you see, life is experienced in the present moment. So the more you are separated from the present moment, the less you are truly living. And the great thing about this is that when we surrender, we aren't trying to force reality to bend to our will. You can still get everything you want. The difference is you allow God to bring it to you in divine timing. Because as an ego, if we try to force life to be the way we want it to be, all of the desires, even if we get them, will come with unintended consequences. They will come with baggage, and you will not be able to truly enjoy them. But God can provide to you all the things you want in this life and more without any of the baggage at the exactly right time. The problem is the nature of the ego is power and control. The last thing it wants to do is surrender. And that, my friends, is the essence of the spiritual journey. It's a continued surrender, trust and faith in God. Letting go of power and control. Letting go of needing life to be exactly the way we want it to be. And the more we surrender, the more we enter into harmony with the flow of life, the more easily we can flow through life. So there's no more struggle. There's no more really even problems. Life becomes effortless. You attract everything you want without even trying. Because it's just the nature of who you are now. Whereas with most people, they want something, so they think they need to do more. I gotta do more. I gotta work longer hours. I gotta do this, I gotta do that. So they spend, but because their identity, they're acting from a place of scarcity. No matter what they do, no matter how hard they work, they always return to who they are. You cannot bend reality without it snapping back and hitting you in the face. You can want all the abundance in the world, and you can work 100 hours a week if you have a scarcity identity, a lack and scarcity mindset. You will always lose everything. You will always return to lack and scarcity no matter what you do. Even if you get the whole world, you'll end with nothing. But if you become an abundant person by being content and satisfied in the present moment, then it doesn't matter what you do, you will always have abundance. Because that is your very nature. And it doesn't matter even if you become broke over and over and over again. You will naturally, without effort, return to abundance. To abundance. To Bundy. Not to Bundy. This is the difference between living a life of endless struggle and suffering versus living an effortless life of joy, peace, love, and abundance. To the ego, this is like, whoa, this is strange. I couldn't imagine this life could be this way. Life seems to be nothing but an endless struggle. That is because for the ego it is. But the ego is just a thought believed in. So too, or the same thing with our desires. And to the degree in which we resist, that we cannot surrender, that is how long it will take for our desires to enter our life. Meaning the quicker you surrender, the quicker you can get everything you want. And everybody is at their own pace, on their own journey. Even when I was resisting and struggling and suffering, I was exactly where I needed to be at that moment. That I wasn't supposed to be further than I was. That even now, if I get triggered or something, I don't need to judge myself and saying, oh, you're more spiritual than this, come on. I can't believe you. You're still here? I thought we were over this. Again, all psychological nonsense. It's much easier for me to accept myself now because I'm no longer really trying so hard to be spiritual. I'm no longer really trying to do anything. Life is just happening. That is what life is like when you surrender. Going with the flow of the river, leading you to the ocean. Ah, very nice. Whereas most people, as the ego, they're struggling upstream. No, I don't want to go this way. And so life is effortful. So wherever you are on your spiritual journey, it's all good. Everything is okay. Everything is going according to plan. Everything is exactly the way it needs to be. Just relax, be at ease, enjoy the ride. And if you're really having trouble, all you gotta do is ask God for guidance. Just pray. And the divine intelligence of the universe, of existence itself, the source of all life within you, will guide you, because that is what God loves most. God wants everything good for you. God wants to give you all the good things in the universe. But the problem is we're constantly sabotaging our life because of ego. Because we're always trying to force our desires. We're living in lack and scarcity. We're living in ignorance. Everything that you seek is also seeking you. Like how Abraham Hicks often says, what is it called? GPT is the one.
Yes.
I finally found it. Abraham Hicks called it vibrational escrow. What this means is that you send out rockets of desire. For instance, you have a desire, you want something. You tell the universe, you tell life, I want this. And so the universe says, okay, you want this, let's bring it to you. You can have it, sure, why not? But what we do is that we remain in an energetic state of lack and scarcity. And so what happens is we separate ourselves from our desire. And you can think of it like all that we want is in this kind of vibrational escrow. In the future, there's all of these goodies waiting for us. The moment we align energetically with what we desire. But so long as we remain in lack and scarcity, all those goodies stay separated from us. And so what we want to do is close the gap between where we are and all the goodies that are already there, that are already waiting for us. And it's an accumulation of all the things we've said we want, all of our desires. They're already yours. All we have to do is close the gap by how? Being content and satisfied now. Because think about the most abundant version of you, the version of you already living your dream life. How do they act? How do they think? How do they feel? Do you think they have desires? Do you think they desire what you desire now? No, because they have what you desire now. So they feel satisfied. So if you want to align yourself with the most abundant version of yourself, you learn to be content and satisfied now. What else do they feel? They feel gratitude. So if you want to more quickly live a life of abundance, live your dream life, you focus on what you are already grateful for. Because energy is the force of creation, and our mind is a tool that directs the flow of energy. And so we will always create more of what we focus on. So the more you focus on gratitude, the more gratitude you will create. The more you focus on the abundance already present in your life, the more abundance you will create. And the more you focus on lack and scarcity and what you don't have and how much you really want this thing, the more you will separate yourself energetically from all that you desire. Because you'll be creating more lack and scarcity. So it's really simple. You imagine, okay, how does my dream version feel, think, and act? And then you begin cultivating those feelings. As Abraham Hicks would say, think better feeling thoughts. Does judging yourself and beating yourself up make you feel better? I don't think so. That is why we learn to reframe our attitude toward life, to look toward God, because no matter what happens to us, we will always come out on top. Doesn't matter the external circumstances. What matters is your attitude, an attitude of gratitude. And we feel what we focus on. Infinite abundance and infinite scarcity exist at the same time. What matters is what you choose to focus on. So step by step, day by day, you focus on all the things you have rather than the things that you don't. And that is how you become more content and more satisfied. But when you ruminate and focus on all the things you don't have, that is what keeps you stuck. That is what keeps you frustrated. So don't try to get rid of your desires, because it will not help you in your ultimate goal. Whether you want freedom or whether or not you want to just have earthly things. No matter what, trying to get rid of your desires is a bad idea. But learning to be satisfied in this present moment, to find God, to find peace within you, that is the pathway to everything you could ever desire and more. I am Ray. Visit my cool store. Much peace and many blessings, and remember, just be.